was the ghost of soul, until one woman looked at him across a cafe table and saw a person he had almost forgotten he could be. Jackson ruled from the shadows. Feared across the city. Precise, untouchable, impossible to read. People spoke his name carefully, like it had edges. Men who had crossed him didn't cross him twice. He ran his empire the way a surgeon operates, clean cuts, no hesitation, no feeling. He did not sit with strangers. He did not make small talk. He did not go on blind dates. Emotion was a liability. Attachment was a trap. He had decided that a long time ago, and nothing had ever made him question it. Until a Tuesday evening in late October, when his phone buzzed and the name on the screen was Jean. Jackson. I need you to do something for me. A pause. There's a girl waiting at a cafe near Hongik University. I set up a blind date and I can't make it. Just go. Sit down. 10 minutes. Please. Jackson almost laughed. I don't do things like this. I know. That's why I'm asking you. 10 minutes. I will owe you for the rest of my life. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he exhaled. 10 minutes. That's all. He pulled on his black suit jacket, collar open, no tie, and drove through the wet Seoul streets toward a place he had no business going. The cafe was warm and quiet. A small bell rang above the door when he stepped inside. And then he stopped. By the window, in a fitted cream dress, with long neat braids falling past her shoulders, sat a woman with radiant brown skin and expressive eyes, and a notebook held against her chest like a shield. She looked up the moment he walked in. Not with recognition. Not with fear. With a kind of calm, open attention that nobody had ever given him before. Something shifted in his chest. Not power. Not strategy. Something he didn't have a name for. She smiled softly. You must be Jean. He should have corrected her. Instead, he heard himself pull out the chair and sit down. Yes, he said. And he sat. 10 minutes, he told himself. Just 10 minutes. He did not know, as her eyes met his across that small cafe table, that those 10 minutes were about to cost him everything he thought he was. Maya spoke with quiet energy, the kind that comes from people who actually believe in what they're saying. She was studying international business, she told him. She wanted to understand how economic systems shaped communities. She wanted to help people who had been left out of the conversation find their way back to the table. The world isn't broken, she said, tilting her head slightly, her braids falling forward. It's just arranged badly. And arrangements can be changed. Jackson looked at her across the rim of his coffee cup. He said nothing. But inside, something he had buried a very long time ago moved, quietly, dangerously, toward the surface. She talked the way people do when they've spent too long being careful, in careful bursts, like she was testing how much space she was allowed to take up. Jackson noticed that first. The way she would start a sentence confidently, then glance at him as if checking whether he was still listening. He was always still listening. She told him about growing up watching her mother negotiate everything, school fees, market prices, respect, with nothing but intelligence and composure. She said it like it was ordinary. Like strength inherited from a woman who had no safety net was just a fact of life, not something remarkable. Jackson had grown up around men who performed strength loudly. He had never considered that it could look like this, quiet, certain, unhurried. What do you actually want? He asked. Not dismissively. Genuinely. She looked at him for a moment, as if recalibrating. Most people didn't ask that directly. I want to build things, she said finally. Not tear them down. I want to walk into rooms where decisions are being made and change what gets decided. He looked at her carefully. And you think they'll let you in? She smiled, not bitterly, not naively. Something more precise than either. I'm not waiting to be let in. 10 minutes had passed before he realized he hadn't checked his watch once. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Then somewhere past the first hour, a second round of coffee arrived that neither of them had ordered and both of them accepted without comment. The cafe had softened around them, fewer people, lower light, the kind of quiet that settles in when a city starts winding down. He told her almost nothing about himself. He deflected with questions the way he usually deflected with silence, and she answered each one fully, genuinely, without performing. At one point she laughed at something he said, a dry, understated observation about ambition, and the sound was so unguarded that it surprised him more than anything else that evening. When she finally glanced at her phone and said she had an early seminar, he stood when she stood, which was not something he typically did. I'm glad you came, she said simply. He nodded once. So am I. He walked out into the cold night air and sat in his car for a full minute before starting the engine. His jaw was tight. His hands were still on the wheel. Outside, the Seoul streets moved with their usual indifference. He had gone in for 10 minutes. He had stayed for an hour. And he could not, for the first time in years, quiet his own mind. The meeting had been running for 40 minutes and Jackson had not absorbed a single word of it. He was aware of this. He was also aware that the three men sitting across the table from him were aware of it, the careful way they kept pausing mid-sentence, leaving space for him to respond, getting nothing back but the particular stillness he usually wore when he was thinking several moves ahead. They assumed that was what was happening. He let them assume. He was not thinking several moves ahead. He was thinking about a sentence she had said. I'm not waiting to be let in. Enough, he said, cutting across a report he hadn't heard. We continue tomorrow. No one asked why. That evening he found himself driving a route he had no reason to take, past Hongik University, through the slow evening traffic near the campus gates. He told himself it was coincidence. He had business in that district. He had always had business in that district. He didn't stop. He just slowed. And then he saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the main path, alone, her braids falling forward over her shoulder as she bent over an open book. One hand held the page flat against the evening breeze. She wasn't performing study, the focused, self-conscious kind people do in public. She was simply reading, entirely inside it, the way people are when they have no idea they're being watched. She looked completely at peace. Jackson sat with his hands on the wheel and looked at her through the car window for no longer than 30 seconds. Maybe less. But in those seconds something moved through him that had no clean name, not desire exactly, not protectiveness exactly. Something older and quieter than either. The feeling of recognizing a thing as rare before you've had time to decide what to do about it. He drove away before she could look up. He knew what his world was. He had built it deliberately, every dark corner of it, every arrangement that couldn't survive daylight. He knew what it did to things that came too close. He had watched it happen to people who deserved better. He had told himself, for years, that keeping his distance from anything clean was its own form of discipline. He called his financial advisor before he reached the main road. Start moving the Mapo assets, he said. Quietly. Clean accounts only. Begin the review process we discussed last year. A pause on the other end. Are you sure, sir? That will take time. I know, Jackson said. Start anyway. He ended the call and drove home through the lit-up city, saying nothing more to anyone. It was an ordinary Wednesday when it happened. Maya came through the faculty building's glass doors with her bag on one shoulder and her mind still half inside the case study she had just spent 3 hours arguing over. She was thinking about equity structures and emerging markets. She was not thinking about him. Then she stopped. 3 black cars sat along the curb in a line, the kind that don't belong near universities, the kind that exist to signal something. A group of men stood at measured distances from each other, not moving, not speaking, watching everything at once. Students had already begun to slow down, the natural human instinct to sense danger before naming it. And in the middle of it, stepping out of the center vehicle in a sharp dark suit with his collar open and a tattoo visible at his neck, was the man she had sat across from in a cafe and told her quiet dreams to. She felt the moment fracture. She heard his name before she could fully process what she was seeing, a whisper from somewhere behind her that moved through the small crowd the way cold moves through a room. A name she had encountered in her coursework. In case studies on criminal enterprise and economic disruption and the kind of systemic harm that left whole communities hollowed out. Jackson. She walked toward him anyway. He saw her coming and he didn't move. Didn't adjust his expression or manufacture an explanation. He just stood still and let her close the distance, and that stillness, which she had once read as confidence, now looked like something else entirely. "Tell me it's not true," she said quietly. He looked at her directly. "I can't tell you that." She absorbed it. Every word of it. The businesses. The operations. The years of it. He didn't minimize and he didn't perform remorse. He simply told her the truth in the same measured voice he had used to ask her questions across a cafe table, and that made it worse somehow, that the same person had sat there and listened to her talk about building things while being, himself, responsible for tearing them apart. "You are everything I came here to understand," she said, and her voice was steady in the way that means someone is holding something very tightly. "Everything I want to fight against." She walked away. He did not follow. He stood on that pavement and watched her go, and he did not call after her, because she was right. She was completely right. That night he stood alone on his balcony above the city lights for a long time, not moving, not making calls, not planning anything. For the first time since he was a boy, he felt ashamed. The warehouse fire was reported at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. By 2:17, Jackson was already dressed and reading the details his men had pulled together with the efficient silence of people who had handled worse. The building was gone. The message was clear. Ryan had been watching the asset movements, the press activity, the quiet restructuring, and had decided that a man changing direction was a man losing his grip. Jackson said nothing. He read. He waited. Then, an hour later, a second message arrived. Not a report this time. A photograph. Maya, leaving the faculty building. Taken from a distance, slightly elevated, the kind of angle that said, "We know where she is, and we can get closer." He set his phone face down on the table. His men were arranged around the room in a silence that was not calm. It was the held breath kind, the kind that precedes an order. They had worked for him long enough to know the difference between him thinking and him deciding. They were waiting for the decision now. The old decision. The one that had always come in situations like this, swift, disproportionate, final. He sat with his hands flat on the table for a long time. "We don't retaliate," he said. Nobody moved. "We don't send a message. We don't touch anything of his. We move forward." He looked up, and his expression was not uncertain. It was the most deliberate thing in the room. "That's the order." The silence that followed was a different kind. Not anticipation. Something closer to unease, the particular discomfort of men watching a framework they understood begin to shift beneath them. One of his senior men opened his mouth. Jackson looked at him. He closed it again. The next morning, Jackson's advisors arrived at his office to find a decision already made. The press conference was held in a clean, well-lit hall in central Seoul, nothing dark about it, nothing that gestured toward the version of himself that operated in shadows. He stood at a prepared lectern in a plain dark suit. No guards visible. Cameras arranged in a row. He spoke without notes. Every business under his name, he said, would undergo full legal restructuring and public financial review. Complete transparency. Community reinvestment. Effective immediately. The room was very quiet while he spoke. Journalists typed fast. Somewhere in the underworld, he knew, phones were ringing. He finished speaking, answered 2 questions briefly and without evasion, and stepped away from the lectern. He did not look like a man who had just surrendered something. He looked like a man who had finally put something down he had been carrying far too long. He did not call her. He did not send flowers or explanations or anything that asked her to feel something before she was ready. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that reaching for her now would be the wrong move, not because strategy demanded it, but because she deserved better than a man showing up at her door asking to be forgiven before he had done the work of being different. So instead, he worked. The scholarship was the first thing. Anonymous, processed through a legal foundation his advisors had been building for months, full funding for international students in business and development programs at her university. No name attached. No press. He told no one. Then 3 small businesses in her neighborhood that had appeared in a local report he had read twice, a family print shop, a woman-owned catering company, a youth tutoring center that had been operating out of a single rented room. All 3 had applied for investment and been declined by institutions that had better things to do with their attention. Jackson read each application carefully and approved all 3 before the end of the week. He attended the Community Investment Forum on a Friday evening. No car waiting outside. No men positioned at the back of the room. He arrived early, sat near the middle, and when the moderator invited open contributions from the floor, he stood and spoke plainly about what ethical reinvestment actually required, not charity, not optics, but sustained structural commitment. Several people in the room did not recognize him. A few who did said nothing, which he respected. He drove home alone. Maya heard about the scholarship on a Tuesday morning. Her professor mentioned it mid-lecture, in passing, the way significant things are sometimes delivered, between slides, without ceremony. An anonymous donor, he said, had established a full funding stream for international students in their faculty. Whoever it was, he added, seemed to believe that access to business education was not a privilege but a matter of justice. Maya did not move for a moment. She stared at the desk in front of her and kept her face completely still while something she had been trying to keep organized inside her quietly rearranged itself. That evening, sitting at her window with her book open and unread in her lap, her phone lit up. One message. No preamble. I meant every word at that press conference. She read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the cushion beside her and looked back out at the street below, where the evening was doing what Seoul evenings do, moving on, indifferent, luminous. She didn't reply. But she didn't delete it either. She was the one who reached out first. A short message, no explanation attached, just a question about a business ethics framework he had referenced at the community forum, asking whether he had read the original paper or a summary. He had read the original. He told her so. She replied with a follow-up question. He answered that too. It went on like that for several days before either of them acknowledged what it actually was. The bookstore was her suggestion. A small place near campus with narrow aisles and the particular smell of paper that has been somewhere long enough to belong there. They spent an hour moving between shelves, and Jackson found himself doing something he rarely did in any room, following someone else's lead, watching what she paused at, what she picked up, what she put back without comment. He asked her about a title she held for a moment and then replaced. It's about systems that look functional from the outside, she said, but are designed to fail certain people. He looked at the cover. Does it offer solutions? It offers honesty. That's the first step. He bought it without telling her. They walked along the Han River the following week. She challenged something he had said at the forum about reinvestment timelines, calmly, precisely, with the particular confidence of someone who had thought about it longer than he had. He didn't deflect. He listened, considered it, and told her she was right about one part and he wasn't sure about another. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read, and then she nodded and moved on, and somehow that exchange felt more significant than most conversations he had in boardrooms. The rain started on the way back. Neither of them had checked the forecast. They made it to a narrow awning outside a closed florist's shop and stopped there together as the street emptied around them. The rain came down fast and serious. Jackson's suit was already soaked across the shoulders. He didn't appear to notice or care, which for some reason made her want to smile. Without thinking about it, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She looked up at him. Raindrops on his face. Completely still. Why did you really stay that night? She asked quietly. At the cafe. He didn't pause. Because you looked at me and weren't afraid. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped slightly closer, not a demand, just a closing of distance, and when he leaned in, neither of them rushed it. The kiss was soft. Unhurried. It tasted like rain and something long overdue. Neither of them moved away when it ended. Maya had faced academic panels, difficult professors, and the particular loneliness of building a life in a country that wasn't hers. None of it had prepared her for the experience of sitting in the passenger seat of Jackson's car on the way to Incheon Airport, watching the distance close between her and the moment her mother would see them together. You don't have to come, she had said, for the third time that morning. I know, Jackson had said, and kept driving. Her mother came through the arrivals gate the way she did everything, with complete composure, a single suitcase, and eyes that had already begun reading the room before the automatic doors finished opening. She embraced Maya for a long moment, then stepped back and looked at Jackson with the unhurried attention of a woman who had spent decades distinguishing between what people presented and what they actually were. He bowed respectfully. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. She studied him for a moment. Then she said, You're taller than I expected. And that was all, for a while. The drive back was polite and largely quiet. Her mother asked about Maya's program, about the weather, about whether the apartment got enough light in the mornings. She did not ask about Jackson directly. She simply observed him, the way he drove, the way he checked the mirror before changing lanes, the way he said nothing unnecessary. Maya sat between their silences and tried to breathe normally. That evening, after dinner, her mother asked to speak with him alone. Maya washed dishes in the kitchen with the focused energy of someone trying very hard not to listen. On the small balcony, her mother folded her arms and considered Jackson for a long moment before she spoke. You were a hard man, she said. It was not a question. I was, he said. I can see it. Not in the way you look, in the way you hold yourself. Like someone who spent a long time making sure nothing could reach him. He said nothing, because there was nothing to add. What changed? He considered the question seriously. I met someone who wasn't trying to reach me. She was just being herself. That was harder to guard against. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, my daughter doesn't need a powerful man. She has her own power. What she needs is someone present. Someone who stays. She looked at him without blinking. Are you that? He met her eyes. I'm learning to be. She studied him for what felt like a long time. Then she nodded once, a small, deliberate movement that was not a verdict, not a welcome, but something more valuable than either. A door, left open. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning in March, while Maya was eating breakfast and not expecting anything to change. She read it 3 times before she fully believed it. A 6-month placement with one of the most respected international business development firms in New York, 5 candidates selected globally, full program, life-altering on a resume and in every other sense. She had applied 7 months ago and had nearly stopped thinking about it. Her hands were cold by the time she called Jackson. She showed him the screen without saying anything. He took the phone and read carefully, the way he read everything, all the way through, without reacting until he had finished. She watched his face. It gave her nothing. He handed it back. "You have to go." She stared at him. "That's it." He looked up. "What did you want me to say?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then, honestly, maybe ask me to stay." He set the phone down on the table between them and held her gaze with the steady, undramatic focus that she had come to understand was the most serious version of him. "I would never hold your future hostage," he said. "Not for my own comfort. Not for any reason." She felt something press hard against the inside of her chest. She didn't try to stop the tears when they came, just let them arrive, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table with the soul morning coming through the window behind him. He didn't promise it wouldn't hurt. She noticed that, and trusted him more for it. He promised effort. He promised to pick up the phone. He promised that when she landed back at Incheon in 6 months, he would be exactly where she had left him. She believed him. She went. The first month was full of the warmth of newness, late video calls, time zone calculations, the small tender effort of making someone feel close across 11 hours of distance. The second and third months were harder. Life filled in the spaces around the calls. Schedules compressed. One evening in November they argued badly, about absence, about assumptions, about things that were really about fear wearing other clothes. They said too much. They went quiet for 2 days. Then she called him. He answered on the first ring. They apologized slowly, carefully, without rushing toward resolution before they had earned it. And something about that argument, the surviving of it, settled something between them that the good months hadn't been able to reach. Distance stripped away everything surface level. What remained was only what was real. It was enough. It was more than enough. He arrived 40 minutes early. Not because he had miscalculated the drive. Jackson did not miscalculate things like that. He arrived early because he wanted to, which was a different kind of reason than he was used to acting on. He stood near the arrivals gate with a coffee he had bought from the terminal cafe, and he waited, and he did not check his phone or take calls or do anything except exist in one place, patiently, the way he had been practicing for 6 months. No guards. No cars waiting at the curb. Just him, in a plain dark coat, watching the automatic doors. The coffee went cold. He didn't notice. When she came through the doors she was pulling her suitcase with one hand and scanning the crowd with the focused expression she wore when she was looking for something specific. He saw her before she saw him. He always saw her first. He had decided this was simply how it would always be, and he had made his peace with it. Then her eyes found him. She stopped walking entirely. Just stopped, in the middle of the arrivals hall, suitcase handle still in her hand, people moving around her on both sides. He walked toward her. Not quickly. There was no urgency in it anymore, only certainty, which is a calmer thing. She stepped into his arms and he held her, and this time the hug carried the weight of everything it had earned, every phone call, every difficult evening, every choice made across 11 hours of distance to keep reaching toward each other anyway. It felt different from every embrace before it. It felt proven. "I'm back," she said, against his shoulder. "I know," he said. That night they went to the rooftop, the one where they had first sat together and tried to name what they were becoming. Seoul spread out below them in every direction, luminous and indifferent in the way of great cities, moving on without requiring anything from either of them. I used to think love was a weakness, Jackson said, looking at the lights. I think I used that belief to justify a lot of things. He paused. Now I think it was the only genuinely brave thing I ever chose. Maya smiled softly. Seo-jin told me, she said. Eventually. That he planned the whole thing. The blind date, it was always for you. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, quietly, genuinely, the rare kind that came from somewhere unguarded. Then I owe him everything. She leaned into his chest. His arm came around her without ceremony. Below them, Seoul moved on. Above them, the sky held still. A feared man who chose differently. A woman who believed that choosing differently was always possible. Not a loud love. Not a perfect one. But steady, honest, and built, every single day, on choice. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove humanity still exists in the darkest places.